Hi, I'm Jim Shaw, Chairman of the Board of LexMedia and publisher of the Lexington Times. We're here again today with another episode of Coffee with the Candidates, 2024 style. And I'm pleased to be here with Michael Schanbacher, who is an incumbent running for re-election to the Planning Board. By way of a little background, Michael is seeking his second term on the Planning Board. He's been a Lexington resident for 10 years, give or take, and you're an architect, I see, with about 15 years experience professionally as an architect, and you have an office right here in Lexington.
I do.
So you're vested in the community.
I am.
That's clear. I'm hoping today we can talk a little bit about why you're interested in running for another term, and then after we do that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons you think you're best suited to continue serving on the Planning Board, and then maybe a little bit about some of the things we can look forward to in the upcoming town meeting, some of the planning articles that are there, and then maybe a little bit about the process. And then anything that you really want to make sure people here in Lexington know, you want them to know about you as we approach the March 5th election. So with that, why are you seeking re-election?
So, of course. When I ran in 2021, it was a very sort of, looking back on it now, a very sort of strange time. It was really, I guess technically it was towards the end of the pandemic proper, but no one was really, was vaccinated at the time. So all of the sort of campaign, to call it that, was all virtual over Zoom. And so this campaigning this sort of term has been a vastly different experience than the last. That all being said, what I ran on the first time was, very much about equity and, so particularly housing equity in town, and knowing that, we have a sort of very severe housing crunch in, the greater Boston metro area, and particularly in Lexington as well. And that continues. We've done some very good work, particularly in the last year, to, try to advance, those sort of ideas forward within town. But there's still a lot of work to do. The MBTA community bylaw that we got passed in the spring was really just the first step. And there's a lot more work that we can do. And I'd like to continue to do that work. And particularly, as we get these first handful of projects, I think it's really important that, some of the folks who, helped develop those standards are there to understand what the ramifications of those standards are and how they're being interpreted by developers, and how we can make this the best possible situation for the town. Right.
And so with that, though, prior to the beginning of this program, we had talked a little bit about the difference. There were basically two initiatives that came out of town meeting last year. One you said is the SDRD, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that and the difference between the MBTA overlay.
Sure. So the SBRD was actually developed. That was actually an initiative by the Select Board, and so we sort of oversaw the. We looked at it and we reviewed it and we gave notes on it, but that was really the Select Board's article, which is great to have other people in town sort of doing the sort of helping and sort of supporting the board in the work that they do, because the board has a lot of work to do and there are certain things that we're required to do. That being said, there is a difference between the SBRD and the MBTA Community Act, the overlay zone. So the SBRD is really meant to, be another tool for to sort of slow the sort of advance of the single family development, to give developers opportunities where they get a slight density bonus, and what it allows us to have is a little bit of site plan review over these developments, so that they we can preserve trees, we might be able to preserve an existing historic house. There are a lot of different ways that we can sort of come in there and give them a little bit of guidance to try to work with the neighborhood and the abutters, and try to make the best possible situation for the town. The MBTA community overlay is a very different, sort of approach, and that was something that was handed down to us from the state, and we can see the results of that. And thankfully, we were able to get that passed in the spring. But that is a series of overlay, zones in town.
They're called village overlays.
They're called the village overlays, yes. And what that allows a property owner in any of the overlays is they can either abide by the underlying zoning, or they can use the village overlay zoning as an option as well. They can choose one of those two options. And those rules only apply where we've created those overlay districts. And I think there's a bit of confusion. The SPRD applies anywhere in town, whereas the overlay are just the 5 districts that we created.
Right.
So, and those 5 districts were created out of a tremendous amount of, sort of feedback and public we had a public meeting at the community center, and then a series of public hearings to sort of narrow down all of the different places that we were talking about.
Great, and then it also includes the center business district.
It does,
which is a little controversial.
Yes.
So, and I say that, I know that I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I say that because, we're experiencing a situation where there's a landlord and a lease renewal that's sort of, it's not contentious, it's just, they're having to go into some serious negotiations because of the by right nature of that. So, and I think a lot of people, when they were looking at this, didn't really take into account or really think about, well, there's so many places outside of the center that they will focus on, but it is what it is. So it's just a matter of seeing it happen. Now let me ask you this: Lexington is known, like many communities in this area, the average cost of a single-family house has just gone through the roof. It went well past $1 million. I remember when it reached $1 million, and I can say when my dad bought his home in Lexington, and you've heard this story many times, he paid $11,000 for it. Those days are long gone.
Yes.
But do you think that these programs are really going to achieve one of the intended goals of creating affordable housing for people? I mean, I know there'll be, that in some of these developments, they're required to set aside an affordable unit or two. But do you think that really answers the call?
Well, I mean, I think the challenge here, and one of the reasons why, housing is so, prohibitively expensive in all of Metro Boston, is that we have a severe housing shortage. And we just need to build more units. And it's not going to happen overnight, unfortunately, or fortunately in some cases. We just need to have more units, and as those units get online, the market will not necessarily cool off, but I think hopefully salaries start to catch up to where the market is right now.
And if every community is participating, and that's the whole great idea of the MBTA, using the MBTA as a guide, you're getting these benefits. Like for instance, Milton is now in the process of having to answer for their decisions.
Correct.
And so there is a price to be paid, but the fact is, if everybody goes along, what does it say? A rising tide raises all ships, right?
Yes.
So hopefully it'll begin to alleviate the problem all around Greater Boston.
And I think that's the sort of really great part about the original legislation, was that by forcing everybody to do it, all of the communities that are served by the MBTA to do it, whether it's, we're really just a bus community. That we don't have a tremendous amount of MBTA, and we got a lot of feedback about that as we started to develop it. Like, well, we're not served by the MBTA, and we are just in very limited ways. And one of the things that I said, in those meetings was, if we can do this, and we actually have, the MBTA is not going to serve us unless we have enough density that it actually makes sense. And so because of where we place those, and Lexington Center is one of those, it's, if we can get people to live there and we can get these developments to be built, which we have no control over, then we can get better MBTA service out of that. And a lot of the things that we've talked about for years, whether it's in town meeting or just around town, about how, well, there are too many banks and realtors' offices in Lexington Center. I mean, one of the challenges of not being able to get the things that we want, restaurants, small retail and things like that, is that not enough people are really living there. And so if we can get that kind of density for residents, right in town center, we can support things like, the restaurants that everybody wants in Lexington Center. So until we get to that
even
point,
some retail establishment, because we're losing our retail base, and
and so when
worrisome.
Right, of course, and we were very, very careful about that when we were working on the Article 34 last spring for the MBTA communities, because we really did not want to create a situation where someone would come in and put all residential in there and we'd lose that commercial piece.
Right.
So we ended up taking the town center and not including that in our MBTA numbers for acreage, because we wanted to require that overlay to include mixed use, so include commercial, and so the
But it seems to me that you've met the obligation. What was it?
We did.
So many acres or something that has to be part of the villages.
Yes.
In whole. And I understand we've gone well past that.
We have gone past that. And the state has also changed their rules so that you can now do mixed use by right.
Oh, really? Okay,
yes.
Good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your background. You as an architect, one would think that would put you in a position of really having a solid understanding of planning issues. You present not necessarily in Lexington, but you do present in other communities where you have other clients and such. But you bring a certain perspective to the board, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think having an architectural background is really great. Particularly, I've worked on public projects for colleges and university. I've done some multifamily stuff, and whether it's standing in front of a group of abutters in a sort of neighborhood meeting, or trying to bring consensus from the Boston Public Library, like how do you bring these sort of disparate groups together to form a consensus. And so it really has been very valuable. I think that being able to talk to town staff and during meetings to address abutters' concerns, like that background is invaluable.
And especially in the city of Boston. I heard you talk about this at the Indian American Forum that was held at the community center. The Indian Americans of Lexington, right? And you talked just about that, specifically about that, about the ability to be able to go talk to City Hall and understand and deal with all of the contractors and other people, and sort of help bring it all together. And so that's in my opinion, a great strength. So are there any particular projects that you're thinking about now, that you see coming on the horizon? I know town meeting is coming up, and there are a whole bunch of new things that come on. It seems like for the planning board, it seems like I remember the scene of Newman and Seinfeld about when he talks about the mail just keeps coming. They get rid of the mail and it keeps coming. So when the projects, like you do these great things like you did in last town meeting, but now there are more challenges coming forward. So there's just more stuff coming at you. So what are some of the things that are coming up in town meeting?
Well, I mean, so in this spring, we made such a huge push for, Articles 33 and 34 last spring. So we had a big housing push last spring. So, this spring we sort of rolled that back a little bit, and we're trying to clean up, some language. There's some stuff about the MBTA community that will come forward where we're clarifying some height issues and some use issues that, there's some loopholes in there that we're trying to just, tighten up to make sure that the spirit of what we want is being, is reflected in the language.
Great. And I know there are several articles, but that's the one that stands out mostly?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some other things, we're working. The one of the ones that we've worked the most on is just changing the signage bylaw to, allow for what ends up happening is a lot of people ask for special permits.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know, as a chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, I'm always hearing from local businesses that have to go through a very cumbersome process to get a sign done. And sometimes it sounds like it's easy to get something through Congress, and I know I'm being a little cynical here, but the point is, is this to help streamline some of that process? Okay.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is that folks are asking for special permits. You have to get a special permit for a variety of things around town.
Right.
And the special
Blade
permit
signs, for instance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they end up being effectively a formality, where, you know, once you apply for it, you jump through the hoops that you have to jump through, and then the odds of you not getting it are very, very slim, but you do have to go through all of those steps. So we're trying to streamline that process and make it easier and more upfront. Not that there won't be some review on it to make sure that things don't get too crazy, but the idea is to try to streamline that as much as possible.
Because so many people involved, the HDC, Board of Appeals, when a decision's made, and then you wanted to have to go in front if you wanted a blade sign versus a flat sign. The number of signs you can have. Some businesses that are on a corner will have a sign on one side of the building, one on the other, and they want a blade sign. I know Fiorella's is one of those businesses that has front and back. They have a back sign facing the parking lot. And I noticed they didn't have a blade sign, and I was talking to the owner saying, you should have a blade sign. I think the blade signs have been an important part of being able to identify what's in the center. Because if you stand on one end of Mass Ave, you can essentially look for a good distance down the avenue and see which stores are where. I think and I think they've all been done very tastefully. I think making sure that they're not neon and other things. I'm worried, like I see a lot, like when I go to Countryside, I grew up near Countryside, and I see some of the signage around Countryside, I think to myself, is anybody regulating this? And I'm not sure, because it's not in the center business district, or it's not in the HDC district, or a historic district. They're not having the oversight that some of the other places have. But I'm glad to see that there's some relief for local business owners, because I see how frustrated they can be, or can get at how long it takes to get a sign, because HCC meets once a month. And if you miss that meeting, you got to go to the next one. And then if they don't give you what you want, you have to come back. I mean, there's 3 months right there.
Oh, and this is another, I mean, to sort of build off of what you're talking about with an architect, I'm very used to, like when I put these proposals together, I'm like, all right, well, let me look at whether it's historic or zoning or whatever the case may be. Like, I want to understand what their meeting schedule is, so that, and like, how many meetings does it normally take? Oh, it takes 2 meetings. Okay, so that's going to take X amount of time. And, like understanding that meeting schedule is really important, and to understand how long something is going to take.
Right, and I think that it's good to have that understanding. Some of your thoughts about, some of the things that you kind of want people to know about you, either as a candidate, as a resident, something, something that might resonate with voters out there that, maybe doesn't come up in a forum or something, or a discussion like this.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. My sister lives here in town as well. We both grew up in New England. We are the son and daughter. We're both architects. Somehow my parents are both public school teachers. Okay. A noble. Yes, absolutely. So, I've always sort of, been civically minded as a result. They were very active in, their, school systems. And I have 2 kids. They're both in LPS right now. One's at Diamond, one's at Hastings. So, I mean, I was the president of my neighborhood for some time. I'm still on the board of my neighborhood in Five Fields. So it's been this sort of interesting progression of things, of how did I get to be on the planning board. Started on the board at my neighborhood, eventually became the president, ran for town meeting. Then someone in my neighborhood asked me, like, oh, you're an architect, would you consider running for the planning board? I did, and here we are. So if you'd asked me at the beginning if this is how it would have all played out, I would have told you were crazy. And
I think people have gotten a good idea about what you're all about, and some of your thoughts and ideas, and what you bring to the table. And I wish you all the best in the election. And we have, there are 4 people running for 2 seats, and along with that, we've got a selectmen's, race and a school committee race. So we've got a lot of coffee with candidates. So I'm trying to limit it to a certain amount of time. But Michael, I want to thank you for coming here and sharing your ideas and your thoughts. And I do wish you all the best in your re-election effort.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much.